I'm Chris Meabe, and this is SEO in 2025.
Chris, what's your number one SEO tip for 2025?
My tip is to use expert sources. Make sure that everything you say is backed up by either an expert or a personal experience.
Use expert sources. So obviously you're coming from the perspective, I guess, of producing content for other people. So I guess you'll have conversations with brands about ensuring that your content also incorporates perhaps quotes from experts within organizations?
Absolutely. It can be someone within the organization, or it could be an expert that they trust. It could be an academic paper that, it was recently published and has some groundbreaking news about that industry. But as long as it's coming from a place of expertise.
Right. Okay. So to pass authority to the brand that you're working for, it's not necessary to incorporate an expert from the organization. It can be just as authoritative and engaging and appropriate for the reader if the right references refer to an expert out with the organization.
Yeah, of course, if they have every PhD in the industry employed there, then that's amazing. But that isn't always the case, and everyone has their area of specialization. So if you can include a quote from someone outside the organization, you can say, hey, look, we are backing up these things. We're going to the experts, and we're making sure to give you content you can rely upon.
And do you have to get permission from people outside of these organizations that don't work there, that you probably haven't spoken to before, to use their content, to use their quote, or do you just tend to use it?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to directly quote someone, then I'm absolutely going to reach out to them, unless it's some Yogi Berra quote. I think also for academic papers, they're used to being cited without people asking their permission for it. And in fact, they love it when their work is used. So don't rip off a graph from a paper, but you can use that data and say, hey, this is what we think that means.
And I guess sometimes it's much easier to get permission after you've actually published. So to publish something and say, by the way, we've actually incorporated you in this. Is that okay?
Well, I guess so, but I usually reach out ahead of time, and I will reach out to an expert that I find on LinkedIn or through the client themselves. They often have a network of people that they trust. I reach out and I'll say, hey, what's your perspective on this topic? And they'll give me something original just from their perspective. And that's incredibly valuable, both for the value of the piece and from an SEO perspective.
Yeah, you're right. And obviously, if you've done that, if you've engaged in conversation with them, and then you reach out to them again once the article has been published, then hopefully they may even refer to it or link to it from their own website.
Absolutely. It's built-in distribution.
Superb. Okay, and does it have measurable impact in Google's eyes to incorporate these elements?
Yeah, Google's been, talking a lot more recently about expertise and speaking from a place of authority. One way that they track that is authorship. Who's the author on the article? We know that they track that from the recent API leaks. And while it's difficult to tell from that exactly how much they weigh it by, they do care if it's being authored by someone who writes about this subject matter frequently. So within a certain company, if you make sure that your subject matter expert is the one whose name is on the article, then that's, I think, going to go a long way. And then it's also true that Google cares about duplicate content. So you don't want to just have huge portions of your article be plagiarized, obviously, or be even quotes from other articles, because, well, that isn't original. But if you can get an original quote where you're speaking from authority, that does seem to make a difference.
Okay, you talked about hopefully incorporating someone that's written extensively about a particular topic. Is that how you determine whether someone's suitable and likely to be an expert in the industry?
Well, there's a number of ways of determining that. If they have a relevant credential, if someone has a degree in the subject or a license in the subject, I might go to a CPA if I'm talking about accounting, or a PhD if I'm talking about an academic subject. Or it could be exactly what you're talking about, just years of experience writing about or doing the thing that we're talking about. I'm not going to a PhD if I'm writing about HVAC, but I might go to a real HVAC repair person, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And in order to get one, would you just search on LinkedIn and see who comes up first? And that's a good way.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. That's definitely one way. You can reach out to local businesses, local people that are looking to increase their own profile. Because obviously, if you're writing an article referring to them as an expert, people usually like that, you know? They like to be viewed as experts. I imagine that makes it easier for you to interview people on this podcast, right? It's a compliment to want to be interviewed and asked about your opinion on a subject.
Well, absolutely. Most of the time, most people are quite happy to come on something as well. And people shouldn't be scared to reach out to someone and ask to interview them, because it
Yeah.
adds value to you, adds value to them, hopefully, as well.
Mm-hmm. It's a win-win.
Exactly. So what about when these pieces are being published? Do you link back to the author of a particular quote, and do you try to do things like incorporate schema?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what they want. You know, some people they're happy to help, but they want to live their private lives and they don't want me linking to their LinkedIn or anything, and that's fine. But usually if someone's talking to me about this, it's in part because they'd like to draw people's attention to what they have going on. So that could be a social media page or a personal website or their company's website. And so we'll just talk about, hey, how would you like this to be credited? And they'll tell me, what they'd like. Depends on the situation.
Are there any quick and easy metrics that you look at to try to establish if someone's likely to be an expert, maybe on social media, maybe a number of connections on LinkedIn or followers on X or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. If someone is an influencer, even a micro influencer on the topic, that's a great sign that they're well respected in this field. And I use the term micro influencer here because it's important to remember that if something's really niche, if you're talking not just about AI, for example, but about some really fine subcategory of AI, then they might not have that many followers, but you click in and see who those followers are, and they might be some bigger names within the industry because that's who CEOs and other leaders and thinkers respect. It's not just about follower count, but you can go in and see who they are.
And what's best? Is it using the same expert multiple times in different articles? Or if you're publishing new articles in the future, is it best to reach out to other experts and get as many experts as possible from your industry featured on your website?
It's good to have a variety because you don't want to sound like you're just a mouthpiece for this one person who you go to every time. So building authority does involve some diversity of voices, but it's also important to build these relationships up, right? That can have a real value to it. You never know what direction that could go in over time. So I'd say, do make sure to build in variety, but try and maintain a relationship. Come back to the person once every few months, 6 months, something like that, to remind them that you're out there and that they like you.
Are you also involved in producing or working with people who produce other forms of content, such as video and audio podcasts? Because obviously, if you're incorporating an expert, then perhaps you can actually have a brief recording of them as well and publish them, ideally, perhaps using a video embed in the same article.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The agency I work for, Foundation, we have our own podcast called Create Like the Greats, where a CEO will interview experts in their field and everything from like symphony conductors to marketers. Then what he'll do is take that podcast, publish it, chop it up into clips, put those online, and then he might write an article about a topic that they talked about. And those people are happy to be quoted in the article with the quote from the podcast because, hey, it's on the same subject and brings even more attention to their expertise. So there's definitely great ways of reusing that content in unique ways that continue to add value.
I mean, do you ever try and establish a metric to determine what impact incorporating an expert in an article had? I mean, for instance, would you ever publish an article that did have that and didn't have that, and maybe see differences in traffic or retention or other metrics to establish the direct financial impact of doing what you're doing?
It's really hard to A/B test that like you're talking about. And if you update an article, for example, to include expert quotes, it's likely that you'll get more traffic to that article. But it's also true that if you update an article at all, you're likely to get more traffic because search engines like it when you refresh your content, right? So it's a little bit tough to compare that directly. And I think that you'd want a large sample size of very similar pages, some with quotes and some without quotes, in order to really do an A/B test. I haven't done that personally, but it seems like someone ought to.
So now the chicken or the egg question. What comes first, the expert quote or the article? Because I'm thinking there are two ways to do this. That you can actually find an expert quote that you really like and perhaps build an article around it, or write a piece, then try to find an expert and with relevant quotes or content to incorporate in there.
Yeah, I think part of it depends on your own familiarity with the subject matter. For example, I'll give you two examples. One, I was writing a piece about another company's content strategy. And I know a thing or two about content strategy, I like to think. And so I came to one of their heads of SEO and I said, hey, I'm writing this piece. I'd love it if I could quote you on this. Here's the outline and kind of a rough draft. A, does this look right to you? Do you think that this accurately describes your content strategy? And B, if so, here's some questions. So that's one way to go about it. The other way is I didn't know anything a couple of years ago about AI. I think a lot of us didn't really know much about AI, but I had a friend who was getting his PhD in natural language processing. And so I interviewed him for an article and I said, hey man, I'm going to level with you. I don't know what any of these words mean. Can you walk me through this topic like I'm a fifth grader? And then I'll write an article based on that. So I think it depends on where you're coming from and how comfortable you are with an expert telling you, I don't think you know much about this.
Absolutely. And do you ever collate articles that you've produced in the past and maybe produce one summary post that incorporates many quotes from experts? Because, I mean, to a certain degree, we've done this here at Majestic. We produce this book, obviously, on an annual basis, SEO In series, SEO In 2025. And then when it gets published, we invite all the experts back to participate in a live stream just to celebrate the launch of the book. Do you ever do anything like that to actually try and get experts together and create additional pieces of content?
I haven't yet, but that sounds like a fantastic piece of content and a great great strategy for you guys. And seems like you should keep doing it. Maybe I'll steal that from you.
Good feedback, yes. So if an SEO is struggling for time, what should they stop doing right now so they can spend more time doing what you suggest in 2025?
I think that a lot of SEOs get really stuck trying to fix small technical things that don't end up having that much of an impact. I think that you can ignore things that don't lead directly to revenue. So for example, if you have a link that leads to an error 404, that's bad and you should fix that. But hunting down every single one of those can take some real time. Fixing all of them can take some real time. And instead, you could be optimizing some landing pages so that they get more clicks or that people, finish their customer journeys. And that leads directly to revenue.
Well, what are your thoughts on actually how you measure the value of your activities? Because an SEO or technical SEO might push back and say, look, if you have all these 404 pages, that's actually taking away any trust that Google has about the site. It's going to rank all these other pages worse because there's a worse user experience. It's not crawling the website well. That's a much higher value activity than updating these articles.
Yeah, I mean, it totally depends on what the situation is. If your entire website is a wasteland of dead links, you should probably fix that. But if you are auditing every week and just hunting through to find these minutia, might not be a great use of your time. So I guess part of it is, what's your biggest problem is the question. But if you don't have anything screaming at you saying, this needs to be addressed right now, I think that closer to bottom of the funnel is probably going to give you the best, revenue outcome.
Sure. And you talked a couple of times about tweaking articles and maybe adding quotes to articles as well. Have you had some measurable SEO success, maybe increases in rankings for target keyword terms by doing so?
Yeah, I mean, I love doing article optimizations is what we call them. So there's a number of things that we do in that process, but one of them is absolutely including more sources of expertise, both through external links and through expert quotes, real life examples, that sort of a thing. And we typically see some pretty great SEO outcomes from that, rising in ranks and also ranking for a greater variety of keywords.
And how will you select the article that should be updated?
Oftentimes it's an article that used to rank well and doesn't anymore. So we know that there's something in there that's valuable, but maybe the algorithm changed or it's just a little bit outdated and we need to update it. Sometimes it says 2022 in the headline. You go, hey, it's been a couple of years. Also, there's that prioritization I was talking about of being bottom of the funnel content. If there's a landing page that you haven't updated in 5 years and it used to maybe rank for some keywords and now it doesn't, that sort of a thing, that bottom of the funnel page is a really high priority because you could be getting a lot of revenue through there.
Chris Meabe is Senior Content Specialist at Foundation Marketing, and you can find him over at foundationinc.co. Chris, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2025.
Thank you.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2025, the book, over at SEOin2025.com.